There is a moment that almost everyone knows, but almost no one talks about out loud. It is the moment you look at your life and don't recognize any of it. The marriage ended. The business collapsed. The diagnosis changed everything. The person you loved walked away, or you walked away from yourself, which sometimes hurts even more. And there, in that heavy silence that life produces when everything comes down at once, a question rises that sounds simple but carries an enormous weight. What now? In the comments on this channel, that question shows up every single day. In different words, but with the same pain underneath. Someone writes, "I lost everything in 2020 and I still haven't gotten back up." Someone says, "After my divorce, I stopped recognizing the person in the mirror." Someone simply writes, "I don't know who I am anymore," and stops there, as if even the next question no longer fits. This video is for those people, and it may be for you, because there is a fundamental difference between a life that has ended and a life that is revealing itself. And that difference is not in the circumstances, it is in the frequency through which you interpret what happened. Today, the quantum train departs with a very special composition. For the first time on this channel, Joe Dispenza is boarding not as a passing reference, but as a permanent member of this journey. From this episode forward, he will be here alongside Carl Jung, Alan Watts, Jordan Peterson, Carl Rogers, and Hélio Couto, 6 minds that, together, are going to show you that the collapse you lived through was not the end of your story. It was the first page of the most honest version of it. Joe Dispenza spent decades studying people who lost everything: health, money, identity, purpose, and rebuilt themselves in ways that conventional science struggled to explain. He started that research from a very concrete place. After an accident that left 6 vertebrae shattered, doctors told him he would never walk again. He refused surgery, went inward, rebuilt his spine through the mind alone, and was walking again in under 3 months. Not as metaphor, as documented fact. That is the energy he brings to this train today. Welcome aboard. Joe Dispenza tells us something that sounds radical until you understand the neuroscience behind it. When your life breaks, your brain is, for the first time in years, genuinely available to change. Trauma dissolves old circuits. Pain dismantles the neural pathways that kept you locked in a loop. It is brutal. It is devastating. And it is, simultaneously, the most open window your biology has ever had. Your life did not end. It is revealing itself. But revealing is not the same as happening on its own. Revealing requires direction. It requires that you consciously choose what you are going to build on the ruins. Because if you don't choose, life chooses for you. And life tends to repeat the old pattern, because the old pattern is what your nervous system knows as safe. Today, you are going to learn to do something different. In this episode, we move through 5 chapters that form a complete map of reconstruction. You will understand what happens in your brain when everything falls apart. You will do a simple exercise that shows you who you actually are beneath what you lost. You will see real cases of people who climbed out from under the wreckage and built something they didn't know was possible. And at the end, you will have a 7-day protocol in your hands for beginning the new version of your life. Not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, but today, from exactly where you are. There is a particular pressure that Americans carry into collapse that people from other cultures sometimes don't quite understand. In a country where your worth has been culturally tied to your output since the Puritan settlers decided that God's favor was measured in productivity, losing the job, the business, or the financial standing doesn't just feel like a practical setback. It feels like a moral failure. Like you did something wrong at the level of your soul. You didn't. You had a human experience in an economic system that was never designed to be stable. The 2008 crash didn't happen because millions of people were morally deficient. It happened because systems break. And people who build their entire identity on a system that can break are the most vulnerable when it does. That is not weakness. That is a design flaw in the identity architecture. And today we start redesigning. If this channel has helped you at any point, this is the episode to share. Send it to that person you know needs to hear this right now, not tomorrow. Now, Carl Jung spent his entire life studying what happens when the ego collapses. And he arrived at a conclusion that initially sounds almost cruel, but that, when you truly understand it, completely changes your relationship with your own suffering. Jung called this process individuation. And he said that individuation, the process of becoming genuinely yourself, almost never begins on a sunny day. It begins when the ground disappears. Think about it honestly. Who were you before? Not in the sense of job title, relationship status, or zip code. Who were you as an identity? What stories did you tell about yourself? I am the person who never fails. I am the one who holds the family together. I am strong. I am stable. I am the one who figures things out. And then life took that away. Took the title, took the relationship, took the stability, took the narrative. And you were left exposed. Without the script, Jung would say, good. Now we can begin, because what you lost was not you. It was a construction, a persona, a word Jung used literally in the sense of a mask. And masks, no matter how comfortable they become, are never the face. Alan Watts, who had a gift for explaining profound truths with just enough lightness to keep them from being terrifying, used an image that works beautifully here. He would say, a wave that crashes on the shore is not dying. It is doing exactly what it always was. The wave only appears to end because you were watching the form, not the water. The water continues, you are the water, not the form life took for a while. Joe Dispenza steps in here with the scientific layer of this process. When a traumatic event occurs, divorce, bankruptcy, loss, diagnosis, the body releases a cascade of stress hormones. Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. The nervous system enters survival mode. And in survival mode, the brain literally cannot imagine the future. It can only monitor threats in the immediate present. This is why, after a major loss, you feel frozen. It is not weakness. It is not lack of willpower. It is biology. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was programmed to do: keep you alive. The problem is that staying alive and actually living are very different things. Hélio Couto has been working with vibrational field reprogramming for decades, a field that brings together quantum physics, consciousness research, and practical energy work in ways that Western audiences are increasingly beginning to recognize. He adds a layer that science is catching up to. Every emotional state has a frequency. Fear has a frequency. Grief has a frequency. Gratitude has a frequency. Love has a frequency. And the quantum field, that invisible substrate of possibilities that modern physics has begun to name and ancient traditions have always inhabited, responds to frequency, not to declared intention, not to what you consciously want, to the frequency you are generating with the totality of your being, thoughts, emotions, body, deepest beliefs. When you are operating at the frequency of a victim, even a legitimate victim of real and unjust circumstances, you are emitting a signal that continues to attract victim experiences, not as punishment, as resonance. The field does not judge, it mirrors. The question, then, is not what happened to me. The question is, what frequency am I generating from what happened? Now we do the first exercise. Exercise. Rebirth in 3 layers. You will need 10 minutes, a quiet place, and ideally a notebook. The first layer is recognition. Write, without filtering, what you lost. Not the version you tell people. What you actually feel about it. It can be rage. It can be guilty relief. It can be numbness. It can be all 3 at once, which is completely normal and does not make you contradictory. It makes you human. Write until you feel there is nothing left to come out. That might take 2 minutes or 20, let it out. The second layer is separation. After writing, read what you wrote and, next to each loss, write one question. Was this me, or was this something I had? Job title, money, relationship, reputation. The house, the body you had before the diagnosis. None of that is you. Those are circumstances that passed through. Your life, you are what remained when they left. The third layer is the seed. At the bottom of the page, write one sentence that begins, "Beneath everything I lost, I am still," and complete it with the first true thing that comes. Not what sounds good, what is true. That sentence is the seed of your new identity. It does not need to be epic, it needs to be real. Carl Rogers, the psychologist who dedicated his life to understanding what people actually need in order to heal, said that healing almost never begins with an answer. It begins with permission to feel what is true, without judgment, without rush, without the obligation to already be okay. You do not need to already be okay. You need to be here, and you are. There is a body of research that Joe Dispenza returns to consistently, and when you understand what it actually means, it permanently changes your relationship with your own suffering. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Those neurons form connections, synapses, based on repetition. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every behavior you repeat is literally sculpting your neural hardware. Neuroscientists have an expression for this: neurons that fire together wire together. What does this mean in practice? It means the person you were before the breaking had a brain literally shaped by years of repeated patterns, memories, emotions, and behaviors. A brain highly efficient at being who you were, and remarkably, resistant to being who you have not yet become. Here is the part that changes everything. Trauma dissolves part of that hardware. It is painful because it feels like destruction. But from the standpoint of neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself, what trauma produces is literally space. Old connections weaken. The previous identity becomes less rigid. And the brain, for the first time in a long time, is genuinely available to form new patterns. Dispenza has documented this process across hundreds of cases. People who arrived at his retreats with severe autoimmune conditions, treatment-resistant depression, trauma carried for decades, who, by working intentionally with this state of plasticity, produced measurable changes in brain structure, gut microbiome, and genetic expression. This is not motivation. This is biology. The Puritan work ethic that shaped American culture has a shadow side that rarely gets examined. It conditions people to believe that rebuilding means working harder on the outside, a better resume, a better strategy, a better hustle. What Dispenza's research consistently shows is that the outer reconstruction is downstream from the inner one. You cannot build a new life from an unchanged nervous system. The nervous system has to shift first. Jordan Peterson, who spent years studying the relationship between chaos, order, and identity, offers a philosophical map for this process. He uses the image of the mythological hero, not as cliché, but as a universal psychological structure. The hero begins in a known order, chaos invades. The hero descends to the underworld, to his own shadow, to what he had refused to face. And only after traversing that territory does he emerge carrying something new that did not exist before. The journey is not from chaos back to the previous order. It is from chaos to an order you did not yet know. Peterson would say, do not try to rebuild what broke. What broke needed to break. Build what? Comes after. Alan Watts would add, with that quiet amusement he always had when he was about to say something that sounded simple and was actually devastating. You keep trying to fix the painting by framing it differently. But the canvas itself changed. Pick up a new brush. Hélio Couto brings in the dimension that bridges science and consciousness in this process. Most people, after a major collapse, spend enormous energy trying to return to a previous state, the income level they had, the relationship dynamic they knew, the version of the body or the career or the identity that existed before. But the field does not work in reverse. You cannot vibrate from the past and build a new future. You can only vibrate from what you are choosing to become. The question is not how do I get back to where I was? The question is, what frequency do I need to occupy to build where I am going? If this is landing somewhere deeper than just your mind, if something in your body is recognizing this as true, the channel needs your energy. Hit the like button now, not for the algorithm, for the continuity of your own journey, because the next episode goes exactly where this one is pointing, rebuilding identity after loss. And you'll want to be subscribed when it drops. Let's step away from theory for a moment and into real human experience. Because theory without an anchor in lived reality is just more content you watch and forget. Think about a man in his early 50s. I'll call him David. He had built a business over 16 years. Not a startup, not a venture-backed unicorn. A real business, built slowly, with his hands and his name. When the 2008 crash hit, he lost it inside of 8 months. The business, the house, most of the retirement account his wife had built alongside him. He told me his father had never recovered from the depression. That financial collapse was, in his family, a kind of inherited shame. And when his own business fell, he felt not just his loss, but the weight of every generation before him that had also failed to hold on. For almost 2 years, David was what Peterson would call fully in the chaos. No solid ground, no narrative, no functional map. What shifted was not a breakthrough moment. It was a question someone asked him in passing, almost accidentally. Who are you when you're not the business? He could not answer. And that inability to answer became, slowly, the most useful thing that had ever happened to him. Because it revealed that he had spent 16 years building an identity so fused with a company that when the company went, so did he. The reconstruction was not about rebuilding the business. It was about building the man who could exist independently of any business. 2 years later, David was running something smaller, more deliberately designed, and with a clarity of purpose the previous version never had. He would tell you he lost the business and found himself. He would also tell you he wishes it had not cost that much. Both things are true at the same time. Think about a woman in her late 30s. I'll call her Sarah. A divorce after 11 years. 2 kids, the identity she had built, wife, mother, partner. The person who had a plan, fractured across 18 months that she described as slow-motion destruction. She was not dramatic about it. She was precise, which made it harder. She knew exactly what she was losing and watched it go in real time. Sarah found Carl Rogers before she found anything else. A therapist who works tradition en conditionnel positif regard. The belief that people carry within themselves the capacity for their own healing if given the right conditions. What she discovered in that process was that most of what she was mourning was not the marriage itself. It was the permission structure the marriage had given her. The sense that her choices were validated by being inside that relationship. Without it, she had to learn to validate herself. That is not a small thing. In a culture where women are still frequently taught that relational approval is a proxy for personal worth, learning to author your own validity is genuinely countercultural work. Rogers would say the therapeutic relationship offered Sarah what she had never quite given herself. The experience of being fully seen without being required to perform. And from that ground, she began to build. Think about a veteran. I'll simply call him Marcus, who came back from 2 deployments and found that the person who left was not the person who returned. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. In the quiet, grinding way of a man who sits at a dinner table with people he loves and feels completely alone. The identity of soldier had been total. Coming home meant answering a question that the culture had never prepared him to answer. Who are you when you are not at war? Joe Dispenza's work with veterans documents something that neuroscience increasingly confirms: hypervigilance. The nervous system permanently calibrated to threat is not a character flaw. It is a learned neural pattern, and learned neural patterns can be unlearned. Not easily, not quickly, but genuinely, measurably, biologically. Marcus began a breathwork practice, not because someone told him it would fix him, because someone told him it might quiet things down enough that he could hear himself think. That was all he needed to start. Hélio Couto speaks about what he calls the frequency of permission. Most people after a great loss are not simply sad. They are also ashamed of how they are sad. Too much, not enough, in the wrong way, for too long. They are judging their own pain while living it. And that additional layer of resistance against the experience is frequently what prolongs it most. Permission to feel what is real, without moral hierarchy about what should be felt, is often the most radical act available to a human being in collapse. It is not weakness. It is its precise opposite. We have arrived at the point where today's journey converts into practice. Because this channel has always been about one concrete thing, not leaving here the same way you arrived. Carl Jung, Alan Watts, Joe Dispenza, Jordan Peterson, Carl Rogers, and Hélio Couto, 6 different perspectives that, when placed in conversation with each other, point toward the same true north. Reconstruction does not begin when circumstances improve. It begins when you decide, from the inside out, what frequency is going to occupy the space the collapse left behind. The protocol I am handing you now is called quantum identity. 7 days, not because 7 days resolves everything, but because 7 days of consistent practice begin to create new neural circuits. And new neural circuits are the physical substrate of a new identity. Day 1, name the breaking, spend 20 minutes writing, without filtering, what happened. Not the version you tell people, not the clean narrative, the complete version, with everything you have not yet said out loud. The goal is not dramatic catharsis. It is precision. What exactly broke? What was genuinely lost? And what are you grieving that never truly existed, that only existed in your expectation of what was supposed to happen? This exercise hurts. Do it anyway. Day 2. The separation, return to what you wrote on day 1 and make a clear distinction. What was circumstance and what was you? Job title, income, relationship, physical, condition, social status, circumstance. What you have learned, what you are capable of feeling, the way you love. What you will not compromise even when you are destroyed. That is you. Write that list separately. It is smaller than it appears at first, and infinitely more durable than everything left behind. Day 3, the quantum breath, 10 minutes before any screen, before any conversation, before any judgment about the day. Sit with your spine upright and close your eyes. Breathe in deeply, through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, release through the mouth for 6 counts. Repeat for 10 minutes. During that time, do not try to think about anything specific. Let the nervous system come out of survival mode. This practice, which Dispenza has used with thousands of people, begins to activate the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for future vision, decision-making, and creativity, which is precisely what you need right now. Day 4, the letter from the future. Write a letter from yourself to yourself, dated 1 year from today. Not in the tone of I hope, in the tone of I remember when, as if you are already on the other side. Looking back at this exact moment from where you currently are, describe what changed, how you feel, what you built. It does not need to be grand or impressive. It needs to be true to what you genuinely want, not what you think you should want. This letter, from Dispenza's perspective, is an instruction to the unconscious. The brain does not clearly distinguish between vivid memory and vivid projection. When you write the future with emotional detail, you begin to create the neural substrate of that future in the present. Day 5. The vibrational field. This is Hélio Couto's day. Sit in silence for 15 minutes and ask yourself one simple question, without waiting for a logical answer. What frequency do I need to inhabit for what I described in the letter to be possible? This is not a question for the analytical mind. It is a question for the body. Notice what happens physically when you imagine yourself in that frequency. Where do you feel expansion? Where do you feel contraction? The contraction is not an obstacle. It is information. It is the map of what still needs to be integrated. Day 6. The fair witness Jordan Peterson speaks about the importance of being a fair witness to yourself, neither a brutal critic nor a blind defender. Today, write 10 sentences that complete one true thing about who I am is, without false modesty and without inflation. 10 simple truths about what you actually are. This exercise rebuilds what collapse most reliably destroys: the capacity to see yourself clearly, without the haze of shame or overcompensation. Day 7. The Master Exercise, the New Identity. This is the exercise that closes this cycle and opens the next one. You are going to create, in writing, the identity you are choosing to occupy from today forward. Not who you are going to try to be. Who you are deciding to be in the present as a declaration of frequency. Begin with the phrase, I am, and complete it with 5 statements that do not describe achievements or possessions. They describe qualities of being. For example, I am someone who moves through chaos without losing my axis. I am someone who builds from zero with more wisdom than before. I am someone who was not defined by the pain, but was refined by it. Then write underneath, I give permission for this identity to occupy space in my reality. Not when I am ready. Now, sign it. Write today's date and read that declaration out loud, standing up, spine erect, because the body is part of the circuit, not a passenger in it. Keep that page. Not to prove anything to anyone. 2. Have a fixed point on the days when your nervous system wants to return to the old pattern. And it will want to. That is how it works. What changes is that you now have a map of where you are choosing to go. The closing mantra to close the 7 days and to close this episode, a mantra that is not magic, but has a function of anchoring. Enough repetition changes the default frequency. Repeat morning and evening for 7 days. I am not what broke. I am what remained. And what remained is enough to build what comes next. I give permission to be new without forgetting who I was. I am my own reconstruction, conscious, intentional, at peace with the process. You do not need to fully believe it when you start. You need to repeat it until the body begins to recognize it as true, because it is. If this episode arrived at a moment when you needed it, leave that in the comments. It does not need to be long. It can simply be here, so I know the train arrived where it was supposed to. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their life did not end. It is revealing itself like the video. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next episode. Healing after loss, rebuilding, identity from pain, because what we did today was the first step. The next one goes deeper. I am the quantum architect. And you did not end up here by accident.